Hi there, in today's coaching video we're going to cover an extremely important topic that will revolve around Google page speed. Now, we're going to talk about what exactly you can do as a business owner to make your website more snappy, increase its page speed, and present the content for your ideal customers that visit your website at an optimal speed. Now, there are many reasons why you need to do this. One of them being is that it's quite of a considerable ranking factor from the perspective of Google, because at the end of the day, the search engines are simply there to deliver content, and they know that they are fast websites and slow websites, meaning that the faster you can make your website load your content, the more value it will have from the perspective of the search engines. Now, secondly, it's absolutely important for conversions, because if your website is extremely slow, chances are that your ideal customers that might have visited your website and have called you and did business with you, if your website loads extremely slow, they might click away and switch to your competitors if they have sites that are very fast. And this is actually have been tested quite to a deep extent, meaning that over 40% of visitors will leave your website if it loads in more than 3 seconds. So my goal for you with this kind of training is to help you make your site load in less than 3 seconds, and most importantly, show you my step-by-step process on how to do it in a simple but yet detailed but understandable fashion. So my goal is to not to confuse you, but to make you understand what exactly goes into page speed and what are the biggest, most impactful steps you can take today to get instant results in terms of page speed. And for 99.9% of sites that we apply this process to, the clients experience a drastic ranking spike in the same 2 weeks, but it really depends on your site. So we're going to cover exactly what you need to do to make your web property load fast. Let's get right into it. Now, we're going to talk about the exact factors that impact your site's page speed. Now, there's quite a few of them, but from my experience, it's really the biggest factor that kind of hinders most company owner websites page speed is definitely the images. See, most websites I work on really have images that are not compressed or sized properly, and that results in huge file sizes, and that results in your server taking up more resources to load those images. Now, there is the way that I'm going to show you how you can compress and resize your images properly so that they will not lose their quality, and most importantly, make your website load faster, because this directly applies to images like work examples, customer testimonials, background images. All of these images need to be optimized in a specific manner for them to make or kind of reduce the total amount of weight your website has. Now, the second factor is quite far one of the most impactful one, which is definitely hosting. If you have hosting that's subpar or is not kind of really optimized to deliver the files that your website has, or it's simply overloaded, remember that your hosting is the location of where all your website files are stored. And if your hosting platform is not optimized correctly or is overloaded, which is a common problem with shared hosting rather than dedicated hosting, your website speed will ultimately be really capped in terms of how fast it loads. Now, the third factor is really your website's theme, and this really revolves around how the theme is coded. So most themes are coded with JavaScript or HTML or PHP. These are all coding languages, but not all of them are developed to kind of be centered around page speed. Not every single language is made to load website resources in a fast manner, and this is exactly what I'm going to cover in the training as well. Now, if you can imagine 10 website developers, the content management system of WordPress is mostly built with PHP, and that the coding language itself is not necessarily the fastest language out there. So if you can imagine, if 10 web developers would code a theme for a site, all of them would come up with unique kind of outcomes and how the theme is built, because although the coding language is the same, every single coder will develop their own unique kind of perspective of how the site should look, and the way your website is structured will result in which files load fast. But once again, every single file that your website has to load for it to load fully is not created equal. Some files are not completely necessary to be loaded first, and this is specifically what we're going to talk about when it comes to making your site load faster, when it comes to how your website is coded. Now, the fourth factor is really revolves around what's called render blocking JavaScript. Now, this specific problem is CSS, render blocking JavaScript or CSS. Now, when it comes to this specific problem, you can't necessarily eliminate it a lot of the times, but what you can do is minimize it, because ultimately some of the files and some of the scripts that your website has must load for your website to load and work properly. Now, some of the files are loaded first instead of the files that are really crucial for the website to load up for the visitor that's requesting access to it, meaning that you see a lot of sites that have files that did not load properly, but you can already see the site, and this is exactly what we are going to talk about. There is a specific way to make certain files that are not necessarily crucial for the site to load. We're going to put them below the code and load the most crucial code first for your site to load up quicker for the user. Now, the next factor is really about browser caching. And when it comes to this, we're going to implement a specific set of code that will request your website to be saved from the server side, meaning that the second time someone visits your site, all the files will be stored on the user's computer rather than on the server side. So it will take the resource that will be required for your website to show up will be loaded faster because they are stored locally. Now, some of the next factors is really gzip compression. Now, think about gzip compression as a method of reducing huge files and compressing them into smaller ones. But this will happen without deteriorating your overall file quality, meaning that, let's say you have a file that's required to load if you want your site to load. Well, if the file size of that file is, let's say, 200 megabytes, if we can make it 150 megabytes, but still retain the quality and make that file functional, we want to keep the compressed version of that file rather than have the initial version of the file that's not necessarily needed to be that huge. Now, some of the next factors is really some of the most kind of additional factors also is Minify Files, and this is specifically kind of most of the time by using this method we focus on text files. So imagine a piece of code that's required for your website to load. Well, if that piece of code, if we can compress it so that it does not have a lot of white or blank space in it, that code will be smaller and we can make it minified, so to speak, for your site to load faster. Now, one of the final factors is actually a CDN. Now, a CDN is Content Delivery Network. Now, what this kind of approach does is it takes specific files, specific huge files of your website, and puts them on a different server that's specifically optimized to deliver those files more optimally and in a more fast manner. This is kind of the more simplistic way to look at it. Now, there are other kind of JavaScript and CSS optimizations that we can do and that we mostly perform on client side simply because we know what we're doing. But since this training is specifically meant for business owners that want to improve their sites themselves or hire someone to do it and kind of train them on it, we're going to focus on safe procedures that will have a direct positive impact for your site but are not necessarily include risky tactics that might make your site crash. We're not going to talk about the more advanced JavaScript and CSS optimizations that are more risky to do. This training is specifically going to revolve around simple, straightforward processes that are going to have a direct positive impact on your site. So now that you have an entire overview of all of the factors that impact your site speed, let's move on. Now let's talk about some of the tools that we're going to use to judge your website's page speed and to kind of monitor how it improves. Now, the first tool that we are going to use is called GT Metrics. Now, this specific tool will allow us to see how many seconds or how much time it takes for our website to load. So for instance, if we take my site and test it, we are going to see how much time it takes for it to load. Now, ideally, your website should load in less than 3 seconds. This is the kind of acceptable or kind of optimal standard that Google requires you to have or your website to have. Now, the second tool that we are going to use is Google PageSpeed Insights. Now, if we take a look at how much time it took for our site to load, it loaded in less than 2.1 seconds. And once again, my goal with this training is to help you kind of see over my shoulder the exact processes I will do so that you could apply the same steps to achieve the same outcome for your website. Now, what this tool is also kind of shows us is what are the processes that take our website server the longest to process, and this will show us exactly what files take the biggest amount of time to load and what exactly we need to focus on. Now, one thing that I want to point out with page speed is that let's insert a specific site into our Google PageSpeed Insights. Now, a lot of business owners ask me whether it's possible to achieve a 100 score for your mobile page speed and your desktop page speed. And well, although it's definitely possible, but it's not necessarily what you want to do, because in order to achieve a 100 out of 100 score for your mobile and desktop, you'll basically have to strip down your entire website to look like this. And this is not exactly what you want from the perspective of conversion rate, because although your site will be fast, it will consist of nothing more than HTML code and white space. And of course, you want your website to look alive. You want your site to have animations, photos, images, videos, all of these elements that kind of hinder page speed, but they are essential to have in terms of converting your visitors into long-term customers. And this is, so we're going to focus on squeezing out as much page speed optimization as possible for your website, but at the same time, we will not be trying to make your site into something that looks totally not pleasing to the eye of the customer. Let's move on.